Let's break this down with Greg Valliere. He is
Hi.
AGF Investments Chief U.S. Policy Strategist. Good to have you here. I'm going to start with this. If there is a conspiracy to, quote, steal the election by shutting down the USPS mail delivery of those bulk absentee ballots and mail-in ballots, what motivation would there be for the administration to do a deal, or for the House to even get anywhere, say, with the Senate on this?
Well, I think members in both parties around the country are getting an earful from their constituents. And I tell you, Adam, it's not just the election. It's people who rely on the Postal Service for medication. It's people who just want to get their mail. And I think that this makes it a more serious crisis for the president. And I think the Democrats will pass something, as Jessica said, by the weekend to give the Postal Service at least 10 or 15 billion.
Greg, it's Julie here. This whole thing is very confusing to me because, on the one hand, the president has come out with rhetoric where he has talked about not supporting the Postal Service, and yet either his campaign or political action committees supporting him have sent out mailers to their constituents asking for their vote and to vote by mail. The post office is very popular. A lot of older Americans presumably would be using this service, some of whom support him. I'm confused about it as a strategy.
Well, you're right. It's very confusing, Julie. You could make a case that Trump is trying to establish a narrative that he didn't really lose. Let's say the election, it gets really tight, and there's a poll this morning from CNN that shocked a lot of people. Let's say this is a really tight race. Trump can then say after November 3rd, well, the reason I lost, if it looks like he lost, is because of mail-in ballots in 4 or 5 states that were razor thin. So I think he's working on a narrative that could be the basis for litigation once the election is over, that could wind up in the Supreme Court.
Hi, Greg. It's Julia LaRoche. Let's say the House does reconvene, and could this possibly lead to a stimulus deal? And if it does lead to a stimulus deal, talk about how that might play into the election, because it sounds like with this whole crisis around the post office, it could have real impact on voter psychology, even, and if it would even if a stimulus would even help that.
Well, first of all, Julia, I think Trump wants a deal. I think he needs a deal, sending $1,200 checks out, helping small businesses, liability reform, college reform. He needs a deal to help him win re-election. So I think he has instructed his subordinates to fight for one. I think the Democrats are hearing from their constituents that they want a deal as well. Even Mitch McConnell, who's been largely absent from this whole fight, is in a surprisingly close race in Kentucky. I think he would like to get a deal. So it's possible, probably below 50%, but it's possible that a week from now, we could be talking about a relief package, a stimulus package.
So, Greg, I'm going to channel the old Monty Hall from Let's Make a Deal. If we get this deal, who's going to benefit? Because the latest polls, you talked about that CNN poll that shows the race tightening. And if I'm correct, these polls also show that President Trump beats Joe Biden when it comes to who's best to manage the economy. Or am I wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. The CNN poll showed Trump doing quite well on the economy. So at the same time, I think this is going to start to hurt, whether it's evictions or people running out of money, people thinking about bankruptcy, small businesses still closed. I think this is really going to start to hurt around Labor Day. Maybe it'll just be a pox on both your houses and everyone will get some blame, but it could be a story where the politicians decide they need cover. And it's still, I'm stubborn. I'm still not willing to say that the deal is totally out of the question. I still think we can get one.
Greg, the other thing that's kicking off is the Democratic National Convention, which is beginning tonight with speakers like Michelle Obama. How much of a bump do the conventions usually cause for their candidates? Is it sustained? And do you think it's going to be different this time with a remote convention?
Well, it's going to be hard maybe to get the kind of enthusiasm that you'd get in a hall, in a sports arena. So that might not give the ticket a big bounce. And I wouldn't be surprised to see, 2 or 3 points, something like that, but not a really dramatic bounce. And usually by Labor Day, the bounce tends to dissipate. And usually by Labor Day, the markets begin to really carefully focus on the polls. I think the polls now are all over the place. I still like realclearpolitics.com the most, and they're around 7.5% for Biden. I think that sounds about right.
So, Greg, I mean, you just mentioned Labor Day is when the markets start to really focus. Is it still too early for the markets to really read into the election? How do you begin to even discern how that might play out and what it might mean for markets?
For now, it might be early, but I think for the markets, there's been a lack of attention on the Senate. I think the Senate race is almost as important as the other two. The House will stay liberal. But I think in the Senate, where the Republicans have a firewall that blocks all activist legislation from the House, the Republicans only have a 53 to 47 seat majority. And it looks to me as if at least 3 or 4 Republican seats are shaky. Maybe only one seat for the Democrats is shaky. So you could put together a plausible story that the Senate goes as well, yet the markets, in my opinion, have not focused on that yet.
Okay. Greg Valliere is AGF Investments Chief U.S. Policy Strategist. We know you're going to be watching the conventions and everything else on Wall Street, and we appreciate your insight.